Warhammer Armies Bretonnia by Nigel Stillman. Read by Kim-Arne Larsen. The Land of Bretonnia. Bretonnia is one of the great realms of Old World, almost rivaling the Empire in size, wealth and power. It stretches from the grey mountains in the east to the great ocean in the west. To the south it's bordered by Estilia and Thalia, and to the north its rocky coast lashed by storm sea of claw. The land, which is now known as Bretonnia, was once settled by high elves from Ulutham. Here they built ports, palaces and pinnacles to supply and protect their colonies in the Old World. These are now in ruins. The elves abandoned this land after their long wars with the dwarves, who are expanding westwards from Worlds of Edge Mountain. The dwarves in their turn retreated when their mountain homelands were broken asunder by earthquake and volcanic eruption. The land became a wilderness settled by orcs and goblins and primitive human tribes, the ancestors of Bretonnia. Bretonnia derives its names from the most powerful of their tribes, the Bretonni, under the greatest warlord, Guy le Breton. The Bretonni are welded into a single nation, united by the unshakable code of honor and chivalry. The Bretonni settled and cultivated the lands in the teeth of opposition from orcs and goblin tribes. After centuries of continuous warfare, the Bretonnians won the fertile valleys and plains and pushed their enemies into the forest and uplands. This struggle continues as new enemies emerge. Fleets of undead raided the coastal regions of the west. Skaven appeared from the south. Norse and Chaos raiders come from across the Sea of Claws and sailed far inland along the wide rivers, spreading destruction in their wake. Through generations of continuous war against these relentless foes, the Bretonnians forged a formidable and heroic tradition of knighthood. In the Knight of Bretonnia, who hold back the destructive forces which threatened to devour their land. Unlike the Empire, Bretonnia has kinder climate and is more easily cultivated land. Its vast forest and wilderness regions are separated by great fertile plains and valleys, where the nobility of Bretonnia have established the feudal domains. It is a rich, strong, chivalrous and well-defended land. The mountain frontiers. The frontiers of Bretonnia are marked to their east and south by two massive mountain chains. These do not provide Bretonnia with natural defenses. Instead, these rugged peaks harbor orcs and goblins and other enemies ready to descend into the fertile valleys to wreak havoc. The Grey Mountain. These high mountains mark the frontier between the Empire and Bretonnia. There are only a few passes through the mountains which can be used by travelers and merchants. But these are treacherous and unsuitable for wagons. Only pack mules and men on foot can make the crossing. The largest of these passes are known as X-Bite Pass. Is guaranteed on the Empire side of the peaks by the fortress of Helmgard, and on the Bretonnian side by the castle of de Montfort, held by Duke de Montfort. This pass is the one chosen by invading armies attempting to cross the mountains and has been the site of many battles and skirmishes. The northern end of the Grey Mountains chain gradually declines into hilly uplands in the Guro Cap. This is in principle trade route between Bretonnia and the easiest route for invading army. Consequently, it is defended by many formidable castles and warlike barons with huge retinues of knights and men-at-arms. The Southern Mountain. These mountains mark our southern frontier of Bretonnia. On the far side are Thalia and Skevenblight. To the east, and the mountain chain runs into the region of high peaks into the Wolds. These are very few passes through the mountains, and those that are used by merchants are extremely perilous. Although the difficulty of invading armies to cross these mountains, the frontier is held by numerous strong castles to guard against Skaven, Orc and Goblin. Most of the trade with Thalia goes across single paths leading into the plains of Marigolino or by sea around the Istilian Peninsula. The Massif Orcal. The weather-beaten rocky crags of Massif Orcal dominate the heartland of Bretonnia. The cliffs rise above the forest of Calons, bare except for gnarled and twisted pine trees clinging to the rocks. When the ancestors of Bretonians were no more than a handful of savage warring tribes, this region was a stronghold for orcs and goblins. Indeed, there are still enclaves of orcs and goblins hidden among the crags, well as the ruined ramparts of old strongholds overthrown by Bretonnian knights in their many efforts to rid the region of orcs. Somehow, orcs and other foul creatures manage to hide in the mountains and continue to return here no matter how many times the might of Bretonnia's chivalry march with fire and the sword to drive them off. The region is honeycombed with caves, and some perhaps developed by dwarves from remote antiquity. Not only orcs and goblins hide in these mountains, but also Skaven are rumored to have stronghold here deep inside Bretonnia. Many times the Bretonnian nobles have scoured the region of Skaven to curb the ravages of this foul creature. The Pale Sister. The Pale Sisters are a range of limestone hills in the far northern end of the Great Mountain. These bare hills separated from mountain by River Oise. They mainly inhabit the Bretonnian shepherds and are few castles. Here the ancestors of Bretonnian built a burial mound with huge slabs and boulders of stone from their chiefs. They may have been inspired in their work by contact with dwarves and elves, since many of these tombs, now hidden and ruined, and have become the lairs of monsters, wraiths and other fiends. It is the region which attracts many questing knights. These often encounter dwarf treasure hunters looking for gold. The Great Forest. Within Bretonnia are large, wild and trackless forests which remain unsettled and unconquered, like island of mystery and peril of the heart of the realm. The Bretonnians continue to carve their feudal domains and the margins of the forest, fighting off orcs, goblins and monsters to do so. This have been going on ever since the Bretonnia tribe first settled in the land, and that now bears their name. In those days, the wilderness extended over the almost whole country. This pattern of conquest and settlements had continued ever since, but progress in settlements is ebbed and flowed over the century. Sometimes whole provinces are devastated by invaders or plague or reverted back into wilderness. Nevertheless, there are always plenty of knights eager to reconquer the province, to carve out themselves new domain, build castles, defend their hard-won gains, and settle peasants into the new lands and cultivate the fields, orchards, and vineyards. The Forest of Arden. The vast and mysterious Forest of Arden is located in the far southeast of Bretonnia. It lies wedged between the Grey Mountains and the Wolds. The forest is so big that it changes from huge ancient oak woods shrouded in mist rising from many pools emerge and low plains of dark pine woods and thick silver birch on the slopes of the mountain. It takes several days for a traveler to find its way through the trackless forest, and few except questing knights have ever attempted it. Hidden within the forest is the fabled land of Arden, this legendary realm of the last enclave of elves in the old world. These are descendants of elves who did not abandon the old world with the rest of their kind, but instead hide themselves in the most inaccessible region of the could find, protecting themselves with magic. Although the king of Bretonnia claims sovereignty over this region, in reality separate realm subject from own laws within his own rules. The Bretonnians respect the wood elves and do not interfere with them. The king of Bretonnia have never attempted to extend their authority over elves, nor have any of Brauerans sought to carve out their domains within the forest. Instead, Bretonnia benefits from its mysterious realm, defending its southeast border. This is one of the few regions with orcs, goblins and other invaders fear to enter, and if they do, they're never heard of again. The Forest of Arden. The Forest of Arden is a huge oak forest spreading over the hinterland of the northern Bretonnia. It extends from the slopes of the Grey Mountains, and for this reason is often invaded by orcs, goblins and dwarves enemies, descending from the higher peaks and passes into Bretonnia. In the depths of the forest they are able to hide and organize raids in surrounding countryside. There are many marshes and lakes within the forest, a dense thickness making it difficult to track down the raiders when they are pursued into the forest. Many wild creatures, huge monsters, dragons and savage beasts linger and breed here. So the forest attracts many knights errant, and questing knights are eager to hunt them down, slay them and thereby win honor. Some of these knights never return. The remains of others are sometimes found centuries later. Their rusting armor and bones scatter around the lair of some hideous beast, or glimpse through the waters of misty mere. Here and there roots of tree have grown through the visor of great helm, while sward lie abandoned into the hilth of the bark, great oaks which have grown around. The Forest of Calons. The Forest of Calons is altogether different from the other vast Forest of Bretonnia, being located in the highlands west of the rocky caches of the Massif Orcal. These forests extend over rocky rivets and crags. Everywhere knolls of weathered rock reach above the stunted gnarled trees. Its region honeycombed with caves and cuts from streams. There are waterfalls and pleasant pools of sweet water. Vast boulders perch perilously off the edges of cliffs, towering above deep chasms covered in green, blake, ferns and moss. The plains and the valleys. The vast open plains and valleys of Bretonnia are like gardens compared to the dense forest and wilderness lands all around. These areas are divided into many feudal domains, each held by one of the great barons of Bretonnia. Each domain is separated from the other by stretches of woodland reserved for the lord's hunting. Dominating each domain is the baron's castle. Bretonnian nobles build tall, elegant castles with many towers and pinnacles. The height of the towers enables the lookouts of battlements to see far across lord's domains, even as far as the next baron's castle shining in the distance. Castles will often be magnificent, with gleaming white stone and gilded roofs, surrounded with fluttering banners. However, they are all ingeniously constructed with deep dungeons, drawbridges, moats, sallyports, portcullis, and every other device to confound and defeat besiegers. Around the castle will be found the fields, orchards, and vineyards of the baron's domain. These are tilled by the peasants who live in cottages clustered around the castle, with towers above their thatched roofs. There will always be a chapel of the Grail, often in some secluded place within the domain. A few chapels are very large and have their own domains bestowed upon them by the king and their own retinues of knights to defend them. The great rivers of Bretonnia, which meander for hundreds of miles along the fertile valleys, are important trade routes since Bretonnia roads are very poor. Indeed, many regions of Bretonnia have no roads at all, apart from the tracks. Travelers and questing knights have to find their own way through the wilderness, often hacking through the bridges and brambles with their swords, wading across deep and treacherous rivers and lakes. Boats sail up and down the rivers to the walled town and the ports from the feudal domains of the barons in the valleys and plains, carrying casks of wine from vineyards, enormous cheese, and other goods. Anyone traveling by wagon can accept an extremely long and arduous journey and would be wise to take escort of several knights. The walled town. The walled towns of Bretonnia are much smaller than the great cities of the empire, since most of the population of Bretonnia live in the countryside and there are few craftsmen and little industry in the realm. Everything the knights need can be made in their own castles. The towns of Bretonnia are small and compact and well fortified with massive walls. They are all in all respects just like huge castles. Coron. Coron is traditionally the capital of Bretonnia. It is the place where the Bretonnian kings are crowned, and there are greatest and the best knights gather to attend the king Tournaments, jousting, banquets and hunting are held here every day. The great castle of the king is built upon ruins of the elven palace, and the excellence of the old elven stonework adds to the magnificence of the castle. Coron, being located almost in the edge of Bretonnia and looking out from a situation on high hill towards the Empire and the wastelands to the east, is strongly fortified by immensely thick wall. The gatehouses, bastions and towers of this wall are small castles in their own right, held by barons adeptant upon the king. The host of kings muster within the walls numbers many thousands, bolstered by the cohorts of knights errant who arrive or leave the court every day on errands for the king. Parawan. Parawan is the frontier town set in the foothills of the Grey Mountain, surrounded on all sides by chasms and approached only by a narrow bridge built by the elves. The walls are high and supported many tall towers, giving the defenders a view across the mountain passes into the Empire on the east. The town is held by Duck the Parawan, who has his work cut out for defending the frontier of Bretonnia from marauding orcs, goblins and the ambitions of the warlike counts of the Empire. Quenelles. Quenelles is situated in the upper reaches of the river Brienne, almost in the edge of the Forest of Arden. This is truly a splendid town, in which most of the old elf stonework remains intact. The region's renowned for its vast vineyards and splendid court held by the Duc de Quells. Feasting and tournaments are held here throughout the summer in the outlying glades of the Forest of Lorraine, which can be seen from the towers of Quelns. Are many chapels of the Grail, each one built where the Grail is reported to have appeared. Some of these are already so ancient to be overgrown and forgotten. Giseru. Giseru is located beside the river Oins, guarding the pass between the Pale Sisters and the Grey Mountains into the Empire. The fortress town is very strongly defended, having 3 circuits of walls, with towers and gatehouses becoming taller and stronger on the inner circuit. Facing the frontier with the Empire is the great keep of the Duc de Gros. He has vast retinue of knights, which to hold back invading hordes who may attempt to come through the pass. Many battles have been fought here over the centuries, and there are many castles which have been ruined by siege to the east of the town. The land in this direction is wild heath, settled by shepherds and herdsmen. To the west of the vast and perilous Forest of Arden, in dark times in the past, when orcs, chaos hordes, skaven and undead have stalked the land, Guro has been completely cut off from rest of the Bretonnian by enemies on all sides. In those days, knights would seek honor by hacking their way through the enemy to reinforce the defenders inside the town. The ports. The only towns big enough to be called cities are the ports, since trade with other lands bring the fortune merchants and provides living for many poor Bretonnians who for some reason or another abandon the land. The Bretonnians, both noble and peasants, at the heart of rural people who do not like living in cities. Towns are regarded as distasteful places, and living in towns is regarded as unnatural and rather dishonorable. Quite a lot of Bretonnian townsfolk agree and take to seafaring as sailors aboard Bretonnian warships to escape the hovels of the ports. The root of the problem is the Bretonnians stick stubbornly to their country ways and refuse to adapt their way of life when they live in towns. They persist in building their houses out of wood and thatched rather than stone, and let their pigs and chicken run free in the narrow lanes of the farmyard. Houses are built as close to the walls of the castle as possible for protection, whereas this is no problem in rural village with only a few houses, in a town where there may be hundreds of houses cramped together. The Anguille. This port, whose large fleet guards the mouth of the river Sands, is frequently under attack from sea raiders from the north and east. Consequently, its walls are very formidable, with bastions of yachting into the sea. The Duke of Laguin has the castle here, situated in a rocky crag which is cut off for high tide from the mainland. At the low tide it can be approached by anyone who knows the safe route across the treacherous sand. The highest tower of the castle is used as a lighthouse. This castle is built upon the massive mortuary ruins of High Elf's fortress, which is just as well because the stormy seas lash against the stones day and night. Bretonnia. The port of Bretonnia is built on top of and among the ruins of elven towers. These battlements stand on top of the elven foundation. Here is to be found the castle of the Duc de Bretonnia, who serves the king by guarding the frontier of Estelia and watching the western shores for raiders. To do this, not only does he rely on his barons holding frontier domains between the great river Brienne and the mountains, but also on the fleet of warships. Like other ports, Bretonnia has a poor quarter around the quays, which is vulnerable for outbreaks of plague. It is settlements such as this which are most of the risk for Skaven infiltration or seaborne raiders from Cetra's fleet. Bordaloo. The port of Bordaloo, like Bretonnia, is built upon elven ruins, but here they are bigger and more extensive. The town is the biggest port of Bretonnia and the nearest thing in the realm to a city, although it's still huddled within the great circuits of high walls and dominated by the keep of the Duc Bedeau. This port is the biggest fleet of warships since the port of trade with the elves of the west and many other places. The town has various quarters of elf traders, dwarf craftsmen, Estelians and Tilians, and even the odd few Norse. Consequently, there are few broadery taverns and the occasional brawls on the quay side. The Bretonnians have walled off the upper city from the squalid area near the quay, and guard the portcullis with men-at-arms, so the noble Bretonnian chivalry need not be troubled by these ruffians. The Duke will exploit any opportunity to tidy up this part of the town, and if plague breaks out, he will order the area to be summarily burnt to the ground, throughout cleansed and rebuilt. Muselion. Muselion is situated in the marshy valley of the river Grismere and originated as a trading port. The settlement rapidly grew into big town, especially during the Dark Age of Bretonnia, when the refugees from Cetra's raids huddled within the walls. Eventually, so many people sought refuge here that their hovels clustered around the outside of the walls, as well as extended along the banks of the river. Their descendants were to remain in the city's poorest inhabitants, finding work in the quays and the sailors on board of Bretonnian ships. Needless to say, the lower parts of the city suffers badly from frequent flooding, and the river-causing conditions became unbearably squalid. The poor state of the city at this time attracts Skaven and Cetra's raiders. Elements of latter managed to gain hold in the crypts of the city, setting up permanent presence. Many of the kings of Bretonnia have desired to cleanse and rebuild Muselion, but despite every effort, the city tends to revert back to squalor. For centuries, the Dukes of Muselion have been trying to hold back the decay, but the battle is now lost for the time being. Like other port cities of Bretonnia, similar poor areas, Muselion is plagued by the red pox from time to time. The last outbreak 2 centuries ago was so bad that the city has almost entirely depopulated. This happened shortly after the affair of the False Grail, in which Maldred, Duke of Muselion, dishonored himself. The Duke shot himself in the castle but failed to escape from the plague and perished. The king has never appointed a new duke. Muselion is now virtually uninhabited ruin. The few remaining townspeople are dwindling and settling new domains along the coast established by vigorous knights. In this way, the king and his knights are tirelessly building a cordon sanitaire of castles around the city, which is regarded as virtually lost to Bretonnia. Brave knights errant and questing knights have forayed into ruins hoping to slay monsters and other fiends. Ultimately, the cities will be redeemed for Bretonnia in time. But for now, in days as a port and over, and it's regarded as a lost territory to be required. The present king is constantly being urged by the knights to declare the errantry war to cleanse the city's ruins. The end of The Land of Bretonnia, written by Nigel Stillman, read by Kim-Arne Larsen.